Every small town has its secrets. The town of nothing has fairies. The Ghost of Nothing is available now. Book 2 is coming soon. This happened in late summer 2009 in a reservoir valley in Staffordshire. I walked my dog here regularly, but on this occasion I left her at home because I had found some boletus mushrooms the previous day and intended to pick them. I knew if I brought the dog along, she would only get in the way. The reservoir has a path that encircles it and is about 1.5 miles around the perimeter. There are 3 distinctive landmarks to look for at the site: a 19th century warder's tower, an 18th century bridge, and on the west side of the reservoir, a car park. The weather was fine and bright. It was a very warm day, but the woodlands surrounding the water gave welcome shade. I entered the grounds of the reservoir via a small gate on the east side and started my way toward an area where I had seen the mushrooms. I passed 2 of the landmarks I've mentioned, crossed the bridge, and walked past the warder's tower, which was elevated to my right. This took about 10 minutes to reach this spot. I walked on for a further 300 yards and saw in the middle of the path a weasel, probably 20 yards in front of me. I stopped and watched it for a few seconds. It was then joined by a second weasel. I watched the 2 weasels as they romped about for some time, completely unaware of my presence. They then scampered up to the right where there is a wooded bank. I decided to follow. I went up the bank after them, but couldn't see where they'd gone from there. So I came back down the bank and again made for the mushrooms. On reaching the path, I noticed a distinct change in both light and temperature. I looked at the sky above the water. It had become very overcast and looked like a thunderstorm might appear, typical of late August. The temperature dropped significantly, all of a sudden, and the wind had picked up considerably. I took it at that time that a storm was approaching, so I turned around to make my way back as I didn't want to be around the water during a thunderstorm. I made my way back, but after about 10 minutes, I started to feel that something was amiss. I hadn't seen the warder's tower or the bridge. At first, I put this down to being occupied with the weasel situation. I thought I must have walked further than I'd anticipated, so I pressed on. But it was soon clear to me that I must have become disoriented and gone the wrong way altogether, because I wasn't seeing any familiar landmarks. I turned around and set off back to where I'd just come from. I'd been walking a good 20 minutes and still had no sighting of any of the landmarks I spoke of, and I suddenly started to feel anxious. It then occurred to me that I hadn't seen any other people, dog walkers, people fishing, or joggers, usually a common sight here. The wind was blowing gusts, and my anxiety levels were rising. Then I started to hear laughter, faint laughter, becoming quite deep and resonant, fading in and out. I had a stern word with myself, told myself to calm down and pull myself together, and made a plan to just keep walking. After all, the path was only about 1.5 miles around, so if I kept going, I would soon either find the car park or gate. It was inevitable. I walked and walked, my anxiety building to the point of tears. I hadn't seen a soul. I checked my mobile phone, but there was no signal. That was always the case being in the valley, but I'd hoped for a miracle. I was becoming thirsty, my legs wobbly. The whole affair lasted at least 3 hours, and I was getting nowhere. I kept hearing that laughter, seemingly on the wind. No matter which way I went, I could not find my way out or catch the sight of any landmarks, and my anxiety soon turned to fear. The whole place was becoming increasingly unfamiliar. It was still stormy, and I was hearing laughter I could not place. I decided to sit down and try to rationalize what was going on, still intermittently hearing the laughter. I then just said out loud, "I just want to get home," in a somewhat defeated voice. Then, all of a sudden, the sun broke through on the water and the wind subsided. I decided to try walking again, and within 10 minutes came upon the warder's tower. With overwhelming relief, I broke into a run to get out of that place. Later on, I explained the experience to a friend who told me I'd had a fairy encounter. Even though I didn't see a person or goblin-type creature, they told me it was a spell to make me lost, and that the fairies were laughing at me. The same person also said I was lucky to have gotten out of there. In retrospect, I wonder if those weasels had something to do with it. They certainly led me astray. I think fairies are something other than us, but that's all I have. I can't even guess what they are. When I was 10 years old, I was staying over one night at a friend's house. This happened in Germany. I don't remember why, but my friend left the room for a moment, leaving me by myself. Feeling bored, I amused myself by looking out the window. Then, in one of the neighboring backyards, I saw a giant ginger cat. It looked identical to any normal pet cat, only the size of a fully grown human. I called over my friend's younger sister, around 5 years old at the time, whose room was right next door. And she saw the cat too. It lazily crossed the entire garden and entered a greenhouse, barely fitting through the door. I kept watching for a while, but it didn't come out again. I later told the story to my friend and her mom, who were quite incredulous. The younger sister sadly didn't back up my story. She said she didn't remember seeing anything. But I knew she was lying. Her face was all red. I think she just didn't want to be told she was imagining things by her mom. Later that day, I told my own mom about the encounter, and she told me that when she was around my age, she too saw a giant cat in her grandma's village. She said it happened one afternoon when she had been staying at her grandmother's house. She looked out the window and saw a human-sized cat passing by, its head and back protruding over the garden wall. I don't know whether what I saw was a fairy. It seems more plausible to me that the cat was a nature being somehow, rather than an alien or something like that. I think fairies may exist. I'm not sure, but I find the topic definitely fascinating. My story happened in a forest near my apartment. I live in a suburban area, but there are many forests in my town. To try and describe where I live, there are apartments on two sides and a road in the middle. The left side leads to stores, other towns, and places to eat. The right side, if you walk to the end of the road with the last row of apartments, has a very large forest. I mean, I don't even know how big it is. People do sometimes go in because they get dared to, but most people in my neighborhood are cautious and tell kids not to go there. So one day, out of curiosity, I decided to go into the forest. I think I always wanted to. I had lived in that area basically my whole life, but was way too scared to actually do it. No one talks about the forest, it's just there. Like we all just collectively agree that it is forbidden territory. The day I decided to do this, I kind of convinced myself that nothing odd would happen, and that it would help satisfy my curiosity about the place. I was walking on a steep path, kind of like a hill but smaller and covered with leaves and moss, and hearing things rustling in the trees. Just to clarify, I wasn't tired or under the influence of drugs when this happened. I've never done drugs or anything like that. I was just about a mile-ish into the forest when, some distance away, I saw a thing. The best way to describe it is a mix of a deer with long, very long antlers, really shaggy fur, and very weirdly shaped eyes mixed in with other animals. It looked like a mutation of like 5 different animals mixed into one. At this point, I was ready to leave. I turned and was walking back quickly, trying to get out of there as fast as I could without running, when I started to feel odd. Like, those movies where everything goes in slow motion? I felt like time had stopped moving. It was surreal, calming, and petrifying all at once. But eventually I did emerge from the forest and things returned to normal. Not gonna lie, I visited the forest a few times again after that, even despite the experience. I think my first visit actually sparked my curiosity instead of satisfying it. On those occasions, I saw some very, very strangely colored birds, kind of like parrots, but not really. Birds that are definitely not known to be in my state or anywhere near it. Despite how bizarre this all was, I have very fond feelings about that forest. Thinking about it makes me feel comforted somehow. Those experiences opened my mind that there could be so much more we don't know out there. This is a story of a late night encounter I had with a stag. It happened a couple of years ago, but I still remember it as clearly now as just after it happened. I don't know if I connected with the spirit of an intelligent deer or whether he was fey, but it was lovely regardless. My story is much longer than the experience itself, but please bear with me as I provide some context. I'm a librarian at a university in the Midwest. The campus is outside a city, close enough to be convenient to the city, but also adjacent to a rural area with several farms and a few residential neighborhoods. During the day, there's too much foot and vehicle traffic to see much wildlife, but after dark, especially after the library closes, it's possible to see cats, skunks, raccoons, and even small groups of deer. In 2021, I was able to flex my hours so that most of the time I did evening hours rather than morning hours. After a while of leaving once the library closed at night, I got into the habit of sitting on a bench outside the main entrance in order to enjoy the air before going home. The campus did have a bit of a nightlife if you count our nocturnal neighbors, the animals. I didn't always see them, though, so I would always consider it a good sign if I could see a cat or some other four-legged passerby. I know it's kind of childish, but I would always call out, "Cat" or "Raccoon" whenever I happened to see one of them. None of them approached me, but they would usually stop, sit for a moment to stare at the strange human, then carry on about their business. Sometimes I would see deer as I drove by areas with more vegetation. Each time I saw them, I would roll down my window and call out, "Deer!" When I first started calling out to the deer, they would look up with cautious expressions as though they were deciding whether to be threatened or a bit embarrassed for me. I would say some variation of, "Hello, dear, you're very pretty, and such a good deer. Eat a lot and stay warm, be safe." Once in a while, I'd get a saucy tail flick in response, but for the most part, they'd stare at me patiently until I left, so they could carry on. This story is about one particular night. Since it's happened, I've often thought about it, and it makes me feel blessed and lucky. These are not common feelings for me, which is why I treasure this experience so much. One night, I left my office a little later than usual and had to leave out of a side door rather than the main entrance. As the door swung open, I found myself about a foot away from a huge deer butt. It was a stag in the middle of jumping from a decorative garden area toward the campus lawn on the other side, where it then bounded off out of view. He must have started his jump as soon as the door started to move, but he had lifted his tail for balance, which is how I found myself directly faced with his rear view. I hadn't had time to call out, but I was elated to have come so close to such a lovely creature. That said, I did have to laugh. I mean, it's like the kind of dad joke my grandfather would have made growing up. Guess what? What? Deer butt. Rather than sit on the bench that night, I decided to go directly to my car. My car was in a well-lit area, with one light in particular a few yards away on the other side of the small lot. As I drew closer, I noticed there was a figure under that light. But I wasn't alarmed by that for some reason. I just remained aware. When I reached my car, however, I realized I was just a few yards away from the very same stag. He stood under the light, and his antlers gleamed as he lifted his head with enough height to look down at me with an imperious look that almost dared me to laugh at him again. He wanted me to know he was not an object of mockery. He was a dignified lord, capable of holding his own against such a human. Of course, I can't know that that was what he was thinking, and I know I'm probably projecting, but this was the message I was receiving on a deep level. I stared at him. He stared at me. I stared at him. Then I called out with happiness clear in my voice, even to my own ears, "Dear!" He nodded once, and I felt as though he was as amused by me at that point as I had been moments before. We stared at each other for a few more long seconds, making our mutual respect and goodwill clear. At least that's how I like to think of those moments that pass between us. He then turned away from the light and walked away. I never saw him again, but I have seen other deer and fawns since. I have continued my habit of talking to them from inside my car, and they have continued to look back at me with various levels of interest and caution. My encounter with the stag was special. It felt spiritual, even, and it still makes me happy to think about it. As I've mentioned, this happened a couple of years ago, and I've often thought of submitting the story. I'd usually find some reason to talk myself out of writing, but now that I have, I'm glad I did. I hope this email finds its way to you so that you can share my experience, even if you're the only reader. I hope it makes you feel as happy to read as it made me to experience. Who or what are the Fae? I don't know, but I don't think I have to know. My mind and heart are open to possibilities, and it's from that position I believe we are more likely to find the truth of any matter. This happened in England, Derbyshire. I was in my garden one morning, sitting on the ground, letting the ducks and hens out of their coop and into the lawn. A large, very old tree stump was at the center of the garden. I was thinking of nothing at all at the time. I looked up, and suddenly all the ducks and hens were scattering, alarmed, away from the tree trunk area. I immediately began looking around to find out what had spooked them, and saw a small man, say 15 centimeters tall, that was dressed in black with a tall hat on, its arms in the air. I just froze in disbelief. And then after, say, 10 seconds or so, this fairy with no wings that I noticed walked over the top of the tree stump and then disappeared. I unfroze and quickly walked over to the area and searched everywhere, but found nothing at all. It was a very small figure, about 6 inches high, but with a typically proportioned human form, wearing a tall hat. I did not notice any wings. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But I did see it, and so did the ducks and hens. I don't know anything about fairies. I assume they just exist and can become visible for a short while, and then vanish as the one I saw did. This is the beginning of summer 2024. It was Beltane, May 1st, the first day of the year when pagans and Wiccans like me believe the veil is thinnest between worlds. I was in my backyard alone, laying in the grass under a shade tree, when I suddenly got the inclination to glance up. There's a chain link fence between the neighbor's yard and mine that winds right behind our properties. It was there that I saw, standing at the tree line, a gorgeous peacock. It was vibrant blue and green with glossy feathers and a wispy tail. There was no way to mistake it. It was definitely a peacock. Maybe this isn't unusual for other people, but peacocks are not common in the area where I live. I had a strange feeling about it, like it wasn't really a peacock, but something else in disguise. I quickly pulled out my phone camera and took an 8-second video of it in the sun. I almost didn't believe my eyes until I showed the video to my mother, who confirmed that it was indeed a peacock, and how unusual it was for it to be in the area. I think given the timing and the rarity of such a sighting at all, it had to be a fae in an appropriately ornate disguise or some other magical creature, likely out in revelry for the season. I've always believed in fairies myself, as I was raised in a pagan home. I've always believed in magic, and I think they really are just that, magical beings that reside between our world and the next, playing, hunting, and causing mischief. Some are well behaved and helpful, others are to be revered and respected, and sometimes feared. I was alone, hiking up the foothills of a mountain in California. I was headed straight to the main mountain. It was between 11 and midnight and dark, but the moon was full, so I didn't use a light source. I'd been hiking for about 30 minutes or so when I came into a clearing. As I was moving along, I became aware of many things flying around me. A flutter past my right ear, then one past my left. Though it was a full, bright moon, I could not see what these things were. I could only see dark figures as they passed. There were so many of them that I had to stop to figure out what was going on. They kept fluttering past my ears. At first, I thought they were bats. When I stopped to study these things, they began to dart at my face. I could barely make out dark figures flying straight at me before they would dart off to the side, just a few inches away from my face. I heard others flying to the sides of my head past my ears. They looked bat-size. I audibly said, "Hello, bats," but I was thinking, why are they behaving this way? Why aren't they flying high above and catching bugs like normal? I'd never seen bats behave like this. Not even in a cave full of them. I watched them more intently to see if I could make out any shapes when I finally saw something. It was a wing, maybe 4 inches long, but the moonlight was reflecting off it and shining through it. It looked insect-like. So then I thought, these can't be bats. And it was in that moment that it occurred to me that these might be fairies. I wasn't afraid and felt no danger, but I have a healthy respect for fairies. I've read quite a lot about them in the past, and I was familiar with the story of Robert Kirk, the author of the book The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. It's said that he was killed by fairies to prevent him from publishing that book. So I decided to be as respectful as possible and announce myself. I said, "Hello, fairies. My intentions are peaceful. I'm happy to say hello if you wish to." Then I held out my arms in case any of them wanted to land and actually say hello. I held my arms straight out for a few minutes. As I stayed in this clearing, they stayed with me, flying all around me, though none of them landed. I then decided to continue on my path. I hiked another 10 to 15 minutes, and they seemed to follow me, this time keeping a distance, maybe about 10 to 20 feet away. Soon I heard a noise that startled me, and I started to get the feeling I should head back to my car. When I came back to that same clearing, they began to fly around me like before. As I left the clearing and as I headed down the foothills, I felt that they stayed with me. Every once in a while, I heard one flutter past me, or I saw one fly past. I actually felt comfort in this. They stayed with me until I got close to where people were camping. None of them ever touched me. I didn't know what to think about this experience, but it strongly affected me. So the following day, I talked to someone that I felt had a connection with this area about my encounter. She felt that I had encountered fairies and they were having fun with me. Although I do wonder if they might have been trying to warn me about something as well. I had felt a strong feeling later in the hike that I should turn back. They were flying so fast that I couldn't make out any forms or faces. I could only make out small, shadowy figures in the moonlight. I did, however, see insect-like wings and heard fluttering as they flew past me. I think fairies are people or creatures from an unknown realm that can intersect with ours. Thank you so much for watching or listening. A huge thank you to everyone who sent in their stories for this one. Drop a comment and let me know what you thought, any ideas about what fairies actually are or what these people experienced, or just say hello and help me out with the algorithm. Just a quick update about the sequel to The Ghosts of Nothing. I'm very deep into the second draft. Things are going really well. I'm going to be sending it out to beta readers pretty soon. So things are looking good. So hopefully I will be able to release it definitely sometime before the end of the year. The story picks up about a month after the first book and dives much deeper into the fairies and their world. I'm definitely aiming for a release date ideally before Christmas, since a lot of the story takes place during that winter Yule holiday time of year. So fingers crossed, hopefully everything will go well. And yeah, so if you haven't read the first book, I hope you will give it a chance. There's an audio version on Audible if you prefer to listen instead of read. It's won some awards, has great reviews, and I generally think it's the best thing I've ever made. So if you're interested, the link is down in the description. If you join my free newsletter, Fairy Lights, you'll automatically be entered in our monthly draw for a free audiobook copy of The Ghost of Nothing. I also send out these fun fairy news headlines every month, so it's worth signing up, even if you just want a little fairy world goodness in your inbox. The links are below for that too. If you've had your own fairy encounter or experience, please send it through the form on my website. I'd love to read it and narrate it on the channel. As always, I'm incredibly grateful to everyone supporting the channel through Patreon, Ko-fi, channel memberships, or the paid newsletter tier. You genuinely make this work possible, and I appreciate you so much. All the support links are in the description if you'd like to join in. If you enjoyed this one, please give it a like, share it with anyone who loves creepy stories, and subscribe for sure if you're new. And don't forget to hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.